So I have updated the list. It was a small event. It was in 4 rounds. It was a pseudo event, and it was meant to be held. I think I'm not sure when, but I think it was delayed. But we had ours yesterday. 4 rounds. First round was against Goon's Turbo deck. Round two was against Mermail. Round three was against Fiendsmith Ashen deck, and then round four was against Ryzio. I only drew with Mermail. That deck, man, I always struggle with that deck. I don't know. If I lose a dice roll with that deck against that deck, I'm cooked. All right, let's get straight into it. So I ended up cutting the Azamina cards and cash cards, not because they're bad. It's just I was testing a different theory, just a pure adventure Crystron list, and this is the whole reason I even considered this deck in the first place. Your triple TERRORTOP, your Takutan Borg, and of course your Force Burial. These are essentially the same thing. Gives you access to either engine, Adventure or Crystron. This is the one card SP going second, which is quite good. Just a force interaction. It's really nice. You have your triple Enchantress, your Griffin Rider, and I'm still in one right. I'm actually liking this ratio because there are times where I draw multiple rights and Enchantress. I'm like, oh my god, this is too much adventure, bro. And whereas this way, it never really happens. I just draw either Enchantress, just the one right. I was drawing right a lot, actually. Pretty funny. Preferably, you would want to see multiple Enchantress over multiple right, because at least with multiple Enchantress, you can go for a Cherubini line, whereas with this, you can't. So I'm actually liking it. Your Fateful, and of course, your Dracoback. This was a bit different in this build because we have access to Rosenix. And typically, what happens is this gets destroyed or this gets removed somehow. I don't know. It gets removed from the field, and you're stuck with a Dracoback in hand. Well, what is it? What am I going to use this for? And more often than not, you can have access to your Crystron cards. And Crystron cards have Rosenix. And Rosenix can give you a token. Because all this needs to do is be equipped to a normal monster to gain the bounce. And that's quite difficult to anticipate. And it comes up. Just be able to bounce the last back row, force an interaction. It's so good. And then you have your Crystron Sofafnir and your Crystron Sofador. Then, I don't know. I needed to make room for non-engine because I don't know. I tried 3 because I wanted to play the very bare minimum, but I noticed that sometimes you draw 1 and you summon 2, but you need a 4th one to summon off Tristaros, and that's where the 4th one comes into play, right? You can play 5, but I feel like minimum you have to play 4. I feel like 3 is risking it so much. But basically, this is the full burial. So you pop a Crystron card, summon it from hand or grave, send 2 from deck. This one, you send a Crystron from card from your hand to the graveyard, summon it from hand or grave, but you can't send itself. Just be mindful of that. And then you destroy a card you control, and then when it's destroyed, you can summon a Crystron from the deck. That's all one effect, which is cool. And some of the cool things you can do with this variant as well is get access to a 3, so you can go for Cherubini. And since you already have access to your adventure stuff, to your Crystron stuff, you can bridge into adventure, right? Because sometimes you have access to your Smiger or your Ticefern. You go, okay, summon Smiger, summon Ticefern, go Cherubini, get access to adventure, and that's so good. Then you have your Smiger. All of the little guys have the same effect where you can pop a card you control, summon a tuner from your deck, but then you're locked into Machine Synchros. But you typically don't use that effect unless you have to. But typically you go link this away, banish it from graveyard, search Crystron Spell Trap, which is going to be inclusion most of the time. Sometimes cluster. And then you have your utility cards. These are not essential, but they're just utility, right? In a vacuum, they don't contribute to your actual end board, but it's just a resource that you can get access to through your Sofador. Because sometimes the deck becomes a bit too predictable, and you need to find a way to mitigate that. And by doing so, you need to play obscure cards, right? Because it makes it difficult to anticipate. And which is one I'm a big fan of that because it allows you to be clever and outplay your opponent. But for the most part, it's because of this scenario where your token was removed, and you're like, oh, what the hell, is this just dead? But you get value off of it because sometimes you run out of things to send with him. So then this can send either or, right? So then this sends this, gives you a token, you go bounce, right? And the token can make your Clockwork Knight and then send to something else to reborn something. Like there's just obscurities. I feel like it's so good to have. And also because we're playing Inzektron and its level is very significant. And this one in particular is better in this version because sometimes you get restricted by your normal summons. You can't do your typical normal Tristaros and enter to play to oppress them with the Tristaros effect. So sometimes you summon this, link it away, your Sofador, special your Tristaros, right? Especially this guy. Because sometimes you want to do that play where you go link this away into your Clockwork Knight and then banish special this, right? Affect the dump, and then you go SP before you even start doing your Tristaros effects, which is something to consider. And I think it's really nice to have. And then of course you have your Tristaros and your Citri. I was initially playing 3 of this, but once again I was trying to make room for hand traps or non-engine. Just keep in mind, 50 is my 40. I don't typically like going above 50. I'm not opposed to it, but if I don't feel the need to, then I'll try to make room and try to keep the threshold at 50. But you don't need 3. You can get away with 3 for grind situations where you don't have to contemplate what you return off cluster, because sometimes that's how you get your grind going. You cluster, return either Tristaros, return a 5, return C-Tree because you want to summon it off his effects, return an Alask. So I think that's the only thing that would happen if you increase the Tristaros copies, or if you increase the copies of these guys. I think that the effect that it has on your gameplay is not really caring what you return off cluster, I feel. And there's value in that for sure, but I wanted to make room. Citri, just the necessary brick, I guess. I don't know. And then, of course, you have your inclusion and your cluster. These cards are insane for the deck. Upon activation, searches any Crystron card. The first time your Crystron card were to be destroyed by battle, it's not. Engrave, banish it to special the Crystron from grave. It's so good. Cluster, this is what it gives you the grind game. It returns any Crystron that's banished or grave to the deck to pop a face-up card. And if you control a Crystron Synchro, you can pop 2 cards instead, which is nice. This is usually how you juggle your resources, right? Your Tristaros, return your level 5s to summon them off of Tristaros effect. It's quite useful. And then this is where you have your non-engine, because I do want to play because the engine's so big, right? It's so huge, right? So you want to ensure that you counteract that. So you try to put as much hand traps as possible within the 50 card threshold. And I've been liking that ratio so far. So you have your triple nib, triple ash, triple droll, triple ogre, triple droll, triple veiler, triple imperm, and triple droplets. I ended up cutting tactics because it is good. It's just that what I noticed was whenever I initiated my play to bait a hand trap or bait a monster effect to then trigger or enable tactics, I needed to do tactics before I initiated that effect. It's kind of weird. But I just wanted to ensure that I can simplify, because with this deck, you need to be able to simplify. Because you could push past 1 or 2 interactions, but not 4. 4 is just a bit much. You can, if you out-clever your opponent, which is how the deck is built because of these cards, because of the adventure engine. There are times where you can, but you have consistently be able to simplify with these cards, right? Because all of these are quite relevant at the moment. They're applicable to almost any given matchup except for this one. This one into Malice is not that great, but everything else fits almost in any game situation, which is what I liked about them. And because I just need to be able to have an interaction going second. That's the main objective here. Just same concept of 40 to ensure that you have interaction to engine ratio is quite significant. So that's why it is what it is. Because otherwise, you only have room for 11 non-engine, right? Because this is 29. So it's 29, and you have to pick 11 from here, right? You could get away with it, but I still feel like you'll have 30 to 10 ratio, and I don't think that's enough. I feel like you want to have half and half, but not necessarily. So it's more of a 20-30 ratio that I feel like you need to have. Because you still want to see this, but you still want to be primarily engine, right? I just like that. I don't know. And then you have your side deck. You have your triple crossouts whenever you go first. Your Kobai, your Storm, Chaos Hunter, Lancia, and Encore. This is basically for Malice, right? Because it's one of the best decks, so you want to be able to just have these cards versus them. And most of the time, they're going to decide this against you, so you put these in, right? This into Malice is pretty good. Storming them, making them just use their traps, triggering this, summoning this, because most of their interactions are spot removal and vanish. So you summon this and you don't really care about anything else. And then you have your extra deck. You have your Clockwork Knight, you have your Cherubini, your Little Knights, your Nova, your Infinity, and your Typhon. I really like this in this deck for sure. Against Ryzeo especially. Like being able to simplify, try to bait, and then towards the end just go this, balanced, attack, get access to cluster. It's so good. And this is off Yassine's current list that he got top 8 with at the YCS. I can see why you tried it. It's something you can do against pure Ryzeo, right? It makes it kind of weird for them because everything is increased by 1 level. So they have to contribute more cards to their board, right? Which is where it puts them in nib range instead of having to go into a dual drive, search for the cross, right? So that means if you do this, they have to summon 2 more times, and then the 5th summon would be dual drive, right? And then when they use the effect, you nib. So there's some pretty cool things you can do with it, but mainly for pure Ryzeo. Then you have your Cataster. So the deck is already restrictive enough that I wanted to have a bit of versatility with the extra deck, right? And what I noticed initially with the deck is its issue going second into breaking board and removing things. Because you can simplify it because of the amount of hand traps you have, right? But sometimes you need to be able to clear boards and force that one interaction, otherwise you could lose type of thing. And just being able to force things with these type of cards, I really like. You have your Core Dragon. This is strictly for this variant because of the token. This in Tristaros, the adventure token in Tristaros, you go token, Tristaros, you sync into this, you have access to this, right? Obviously, you would have summoned your Omni, threatened Omni, they interact with that. You bounce, they interact with that. You go for this, destroy, they interact with that. Finally, you've depleted their interactions. You go Tristaros effect, pop this, and then pop off. Just so good to have. And then you play Inzektron. This is only because we are playing Rosenix. And sometimes I notice that you want to ensure that you live because the follow-up is already there. You have your inclusion engrave, you'll have add back off of Lesk, you have these cards engraved already, so your follow-up is there. All you need to do is ensure that you get to the following turn, right? And that's the purpose of this guy. Because one thing to note is that sometimes you preemptively use these cards to prevent an OTK because you're scared of, oh, I might get OTK, so I have to stop them. Whereas because you're not going to lose, you can hold on to your interactions and use them for the following turn, right? You don't necessarily have to use them, especially Nib. If you're not going to lose, right? Because you take no pattern damage. Basically, what this card does, when this card is Synchro Summon this turn, this card cannot be destroyed by battle or by card effects. Also, you take no damage, right? So you're not going to take any damage. And it's just going to be there. They need to spar removal it with sending it or banishing it. But it's just going to stay there. So that means that since that's preventing you from losing, you don't have to use Nibiru. Because usually that's how they bait you into utilizing it. You're like, no, you just end of main, bro. Go ahead. And then if they want to progress in main phase 2, you just nib them. Because they know that you're not going to die. It's just insane. And that's really good. And then you have a Dragster, your Semi-Destroyer. I'm still on 1 LS, as I mentioned before. I want to make room for utility and be resourceful and be a bit versatile. Because, once again, the deck is already restrictive as it is. And I just like having all these options. And you have your Vermilion and, of course, your Corrin Gendrix. And it's not a standard extra deck for Crystron, but try it out. You'll see what I mean. You'll see the pivots, and you'll be like, oh, crap, this is actually pretty good. It makes it a lot more fun, I guess, for the lack of a better term, because it's not the same thing over and over again, right? So every game will be quite different. Whereas with Pure, it's quite linear. It's not much you can deviate. You just go hand trap, you do your Tristaros play, Infinity, set up a Tristaros trap, pass. Like this. Whereas this one, it's a bit more different. It's a bit obscure, so it's not as telegraphed, and which is why I'm a big fan of it. But that's basically going to be it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you haven't, and thanks for watching.